HOA took down my mansion over unpaid fees. The shocking payback that erased their entire district. You thought your dream home was safe. But what happens when the HOA decides you've crossed the line? What if a simple unpaid fee could tear everything down? Turn your peaceful neighborhood into a battlefield? And when they pushed me, I didn't just fight back. I made sure they would never rule over anyone again. What did I do? You're about to find out. Welcome to HOA Secrets Uncovered. I'm Mark, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, or at least it used to be. I've been through some crazy battles with my HOA, but this was different. Today, I'm going to share with you how a petty unpaid fee led to something far worse than just fines. It led to the complete destruction of an entire HOA district. But first, let me set the scene. I was finally living the dream. A big mountain mansion all to myself. The kind of place you read about in magazines with endless views and fresh, crisp air. Everything was perfect. Until that letter arrived. I wasn't expecting it. The mailman had dropped it in my mailbox while I was inside, making breakfast. It was just another envelope. At first glance, it didn't seem like much, just a plain white envelope with the HOA's logo on it. But something about it felt different. I remember feeling a pit in my stomach as I opened it. I thought maybe it was just an update on some neighborhood policy. Maybe they were reminding me about the lawn care rules or the approved colors for the mailbox. But no. It was a fine for unpaid fees. I stared at the letter. It didn't make sense. I'd paid everything. I knew I had. I had all the receipts, all the proof. How could they claim I hadn't paid? I felt a sharp pang in my chest. This wasn't a simple mistake. This was personal. I didn't know what was going on, but I could already feel the tension building. I had just moved in. I had just started to enjoy the peace and quiet. Now, I was being accused of something I didn't do. The letter was full of threats. It said I owed money for past due fees, and if I didn't pay up within 10 days, I'd face legal action. I reread the letter. I kept looking for any sort of explanation, but there was nothing. Just more threats. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't want to make a scene. At first, I thought maybe they'd made a mistake. It had to be a mistake, right? So, I called the HOA office, and the president herself answered. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. Like she had everything under control, and I was just a small inconvenience to her perfect little world. Hello, this is Mary. She didn't even introduce herself properly. I could tell she was already annoyed by my call. I wasn't even a full minute into the conversation, and she was already talking over me. Sir, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. There's no need to get upset. But how could I not get upset? She was accusing me of something I didn't do. I paid, I said. But she wasn't listening. No. The fees are due. And this is the final notice. I wanted to scream, but I kept my cool. Can you check again? I've paid all my fees. She just sighed. We'll check it out. But if you don't pay soon, you'll be facing serious consequences. That was the last thing she said before hanging up. And I was left there, confused and angry. The rest of the day felt like a blur. I kept thinking about what she said. The HOA wasn't just a group of people maintaining the neighborhood. No, they were a force, a power that could do anything they wanted. And it wasn't just about the fees anymore. It was about control. I thought about it long into the night. I couldn't understand it. Why me? Why was I the target? I was just trying to live my life. But I wasn't going to let this go, not without a fight. The next day I went through all my documents, every receipt, every payment. I had proof, but something told me that wouldn't be enough. The HOA was too powerful. They had a way of twisting things, and I couldn't let them get away with it. I decided to go to the HOA office in person. I was hoping for an explanation. But the moment I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. The receptionist didn't even look at me when I asked to speak to Mary. She just pointed to a door at the end of the hallway. I could hear voices through the walls, but I couldn't make out the words. I knocked. A moment later, the door opened, and there she was, Mary, the president of the HOA, the one who had ruined my day. But now she wasn't smiling. She was sitting behind her desk, pretending to be busy. She looked up, barely acknowledging me. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cold now. I handed her the receipts, the evidence that I had paid, and I could see the irritation in her eyes. She didn't like this. She didn't like being challenged. I knew it then. This wasn't going to be a simple fix. The HOA wasn't about rules. It was about power, and they had no intention of backing down. "Sir," she said, looking at me with those icy eyes, "we're going to have to fine you again. And if you don't pay, we'll take it to court." I couldn't believe it. They were serious. But I wasn't going to let them win. I left the HOA office with that same sick feeling in my stomach. The air outside felt different, like I was walking through a fog. Everything seemed fine on the surface, but I could feel the tension creeping up behind me. I was being pulled into something much bigger than I ever realized. The next few days but like I was stuck in a nightmare. The HOA's power was growing every day, and I was being dragged deeper into it. At first I thought it was just about the fees, but the more I learned, the more I realized this was about control. The rules. The ridiculous, petty rules that the HOA kept throwing at me. Each one seemed to be created just to annoy people like me, people who didn't want to be part of this control game. Everything from the height of my mailbox to the exact shade of green my lawn could be. Each day, a new rule was added to the list. And each day, I felt more and more like a prisoner in my own home. It wasn't just about maintaining the neighborhood anymore. It was about enforcing their power, their petty, childish need to control every little detail. I started to notice it everywhere. The perfect lawns, the pristine sidewalks. It wasn't a neighborhood. It was a dictatorship, a small suburban dictatorship, where every resident had to bend the knee or pay the price. I remember one afternoon I was sitting outside, just trying to enjoy the peace, when I saw one of my neighbors, a man in his late 50s wearing a tattered shirt and old jeans. He was kneeling down, fixing his lawnmower, and I noticed something strange. His lawn was perfectly cut, but his mailbox? It was a little too high. I could see the small silver plate on top, barely touching the 4-foot limit. It wasn't much, but I knew the HOA would be on him like a hawk. And sure enough, the next day I saw the dreaded HOA notice stuck to his front door, a fine, for violating the mailbox height rule. It made no sense. His lawn was perfect. He followed all the rules, but one tiny infraction, and they were on him like vultures. It hit me then. The HOA wasn't about rules. It was about picky and targets. I could see it now. They weren't just trying to keep the neighborhood looking nice. They were hunting for anyone who stepped out of line, anyone who wasn't perfect. The more I looked around, the more I saw how deep it went. They had spies, neighbors who reported on each other, watching every inch of the neighborhood, just waiting for someone to mess up. And I realized I was already on their radar. I decided to start paying closer attention, not just to my own property, but to everyone else's. I watched how people walked on eggshells, trying to stay perfect for the HOA. One wrong move, and they'd get hit with a fine or a warning. It was all about compliance, and I could see how easy it was for them to break someone down, to turn people into obedient little soldiers in their suburban war. I wasn't going to play by their rules. I had to find a way out, a way to break free from their grip. But first, I needed to understand their game. I started talking to more neighbors. Some of them had been here for years. Some were new, just like me. Everyone had their own stories. Everyone had their own horror stories about the HOA. But the one thing they all had in common? Fear. Fear of stepping out of line. Fear of breaking a rule. Because if you broke one rule, you might as well have broken every rule. They'd come after you with everything they had, and you'd never win. I remember one neighbor. Her name was Sandy. She'd lived here for almost a decade. She had this little garden in her backyard. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. And that's all that mattered to her. But one day, the HOA sent her a notice. Her garden was too wild. She had flowers growing all over the place, a few vines here and there, nothing out of the ordinary. But the HOA didn't like it. They said it was a visual disturbance. She had to tear it down, or face fines. Sandy had a choice: follow their rules, or lose her garden. And she what? Wasn't the only one. I saw people giving up their passions, their little joys, just to avoid the wrath of the HOA. They all had that same look in their eyes, like they were just waiting for the next attack. I wasn't going to let that happen to me. I couldn't let them win. I had to find a way to fight back. But how? How could I fight a system so powerful, so controlling? I spent the next few days thinking, digging into their rules, researching their policies, trying to find any crack I could slip through. But it wasn't going to be easy. The HOA had been doing this for years. They had the system down. And I was just one man in a mountain mansion. Fighting a battle I had no idea how to win. But I wasn't going to give up. I was going to fight. I was going to play their game. And I was going to win. It's funny how quickly things escalate when you're not paying attention. One day you're sipping your coffee in peace. The next, you're drowning in paperwork, fines, and threats from an HOA that's out for blood. The first time it really hit me was the day I got my second fine. I woke up early that morning. The sun hadn't even fully risen yet. And there it was. Another letter from the HOA slipped under my door. This one wasn't the usual reminder or warning. No, this time it was a fine, a big one. $250. For what, you ask? For a violation that I couldn't even see. Apparently, my fence had been painted the wrong shade of beige by their standards. The color didn't match the approved list of acceptable earth tones. I mean, seriously? At first I just laughed. I thought maybe they were just testing me, trying to see how far they could push before I snapped. But as I read the letter more carefully, my laughter faded. The threat at the bottom wasn't funny anymore. If payment is nay, but received in 10 days, a lien will be placed on your property. A lien? They couldn't be serious, could they? I paced around the house trying to think of a way to fix this. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Why were they doing this? Why were they nitpicking every little thing I did? It wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding anymore. It was a power trip. And they were going to destroy me if I let them. I decided it was time to pay them a visit. I wasn't going to sit around and let them dictate my life. I grabbed my receipts again, the proof that I had already paid the fees. and I walked straight to the HOA office. I wasn't going to leave without answers. When I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air again, just like last time. The receptionist didn't even look up when I asked to see Mary. She just motioned toward the back. And once again, I found myself standing in front of Mary, sitting behind her desk, like she owned the place. "What's this?" I said, slamming the letter on her desk. I could see her eyes narrow when she saw the fine. She didn't look at me. She just picked up the letter and started reading it like it was no big deal. "Sir, as I've said before." "You're in violation of the rules," she said, barely looking up. "But this is ridiculous," I replied. "This isn't even a violation. The color is fine." She finally looked up at me, and I saw it, the smirk, the quiet satisfaction in her eyes, like she was finally getting me where she wanted me. "No, this is exactly the point, Mr. Your name," she said coldly. "Your fence doesn't meet the approved guidelines. It's a violation. You owe the fine." I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream, but I stayed calm, because I knew she didn't care about the fence. She didn't care about the color. She only cared about control. I didn't know what to do anymore. I was stuck. The HOA was like a bulldozer, and I was just a little stone in its way. I had tried everything. I had been polite. I had followed all their rules. But no matter what I did, they kept coming after me. That's when it hit me. I couldn't just keep complying with their rules anymore. I needed to do something. Something drastic. Something they wouldn't see coming. I left the office, my head spinning. I went straight home and started thinking, what could I do? How could I fight back against a system like this? They had all the power, but I had one thing they didn't. I had nothing to lose. So, I started looking through the HOA's rules. I spent hours digging through the fine print, searching for a loophole, a crack in the system where I could turn the tables, and that's when I found it. There was a rule in the bylaws, a tiny little clause buried deep in the document. It said that if an HOA board member was found in violation of the rules, the homeowner could petition for their removal. It was a long shot, but it was a shot. I spent the next few days gathering evidence. I researched every member of the board, every little mistake they'd made in the past. I found out Mary, the president, had violated multiple rules herself, things that the HOA had never called her out on. And then it clicked. I could use this. I could use their own rules against them and take them down from the inside. But I wasn't just going to sit back and wait for them to notice. I started making moves. I started gathering my neighbors, the ones who were fed up too, the ones who wanted to fight back. And together, we could do it. We could fight the HOA and win. Things had gone from bad to worse. It was like I was caught in a trap, tightening every single day. The more I dug into the HOA's rules, the more I realized just how deep I was in it. And the deeper I went, the more I saw that this wasn't just about unpaid fees anymore. It was about control. It was about power, and they were going to crush me if I let them. I wasn't going to let that happen. But there was something even more disturbing that I learned, something I never expected. The HOA wasn't just targeting me. They were targeting everyone. They weren't here to help keep the neighborhood in order. They were here to tear people down, people like me, people who dared to challenge them. It was about a month after my second fine when I started noticing the patterns. Every time I challenged them, every time I questioned their power, the threats became more frequent, more vicious. The fines escalated and the letters kept coming. They were piling up, each one more threatening than the last. Each one aimed at breaking my spirit, at breaking me. but the more they pushed, the more determined I became. Then came the final straw. I had been sitting on my porch one evening, enjoying the sunset, when a dark sedan pulled up in front of my mansion. At first, I thought it was a delivery truck, but no, it was an HOA board member, a woman named Linda. I recognized her from the HOA meetings, but I hadn't seen her in person until now. She stepped out of the car with an air of authority, the kind that made my blood boil. She didn't even greet me, just marched right up to my front door. She was here for one thing and one thing only. "Mister, your name," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We've had enough of your defiance." "Defiance? I'm just trying to live in peace." I said it calmly, but my heart was pounding. She didn't care about peace. She cared about making sure I knew my place. "We've been more than patient with you," she said, waving a document in front of me. "The fines are adding up. You are going to pay, or else." I knew what "or else" meant. The HOA had already threatened me with a lien. But this felt different. This felt personal. Linda didn't just want money. She wanted my compliance, and I wasn't about to give it to her. "Or else what?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "It's simple," she said. "We've taken the necessary steps. Your mansion is coming down, unless you pay the full amount within the next 24 hours. I froze. She couldn't be serious. They couldn't really do that. Could they? But as I looked at her, I could see it in her eyes. She was serious. They had the power to do whatever they wanted, and they were prepared to use it. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a house. It was about making a statement. It was about proving that no one was above the HOA. No one dared to defy them. And I wasn't going to be the example they used to show everyone what would happen if they stepped out of line. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let them take my mansion, not without a fight. I started looking through my options. There had to be a way to outsmart them, to use their own rules against them. But time was running out. I called up my lawyer, explained everything to him, but he wasn't hopeful. He said the HOA had deep pockets and they would fight dirty. They were always one step ahead. And my chances of winning were slim. But I wasn't going to give up that easily. I wasn't going to let them break me. In the meantime, I started talking to my neighbors, the ones who were fed up too, the ones who were ready to fight. We began to meet up, quietly at first, just talking. And then it hit me. I wasn't the only one they'd been bullying. The more people I talked to, the more I realized that everyone had a story. Everyone had been pushed to their limits, but no one was willing to do anything about it. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the only one fighting. I started organizing. I didn't just want to fight for myself. I wanted to fight for everyone who had been bullied by the HOA. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew this was my chance to take them down, from the inside. They thought they had me cornered. I could feel it in the air. The pressure was mounting, and every step I took to fight back felt like I was walking deeper into a trap. But what they didn't realize was, I wasn't going to break. The HOA had sent their final warning. The letter said that if I didn't pay the fines within 24 hours, they would come for my mansion. My heart sank when I read those words. I had built my dream home from scratch. It was the one thing in my life that I was proud of. And now they wanted to take it from me, over some petty rules that didn't even make sense. But I wasn't going to let them win. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't just sit back and wait for them to bulldoze my life away. I had to fight. And I had to fight smart. That's when I remembered the clause I found in the HOA's bylaws, the one about board members violating the rules. I had been holding on to that piece of information, waiting for the right moment to use it. And now, it was time. I gathered all the evidence I could find. Mary, the president, had broken more rules than I could count. There were multiple violations that the HOA had ignored. The only thing they cared about was making sure their power remained unchallenged. But I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. I contacted my lawyer again. This time, we weren't going to take no for an answer. We put together a solid case, and I reached out to my neighbors. I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. I had a small army behind me, and together we were going to show the HOA that they couldn't just steamroll us. The moment of truth came when I stood before the board. I wasn't going to let them dictate my life any longer. I walked into the meeting, my heart racing, but I kept my head high. I had everything I needed. I had my lawyer. I had my neighbors. And most importantly, I had the truth. The board members were sitting there, looking smug as usual. Mary sat at the head of the table, her cold eyes scanning over me like I was an insect to be crushed. But this time, she didn't intimidate me. This time, I was ready. I started with the facts. I pulled out the evidence of Mary's violations. And I could see her face falter for the first time. She wasn't expecting this. I laid out everything, every little mistake she had made, and how the HOA had covered it up. I could feel the tension rising in the room as I spoke. The other board members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They weren't expecting a challenge like this. "I've done my research," I said, my voice steady, "and I know that you've broken just as many rules as I have. So if you're going to fine me for a mailbox that's half an inch too high, I think it's only fair that we take a closer look at your actions." The silence in the room was deafening. Mary's eyes were narrow now, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. I had caught her off guard, and I could see her scrambling for a way to regain control. But the damage had been done. The other members knew they couldn't ignore this any longer. Then, the unexpected happened. One of the other board members, a man I'd never spoken to before, stood up and said, "I've had enough." The room went completely still. "I've been a part of this HOA for too long, and I've seen enough corruption. We can't keep doing this." He turned to the rest of the board, and I could see the cracks starting to show. People who had once blindly followed Mary's every command were now questioning her. It was happening. The tide was turning. Mary was furious, but she knew she had lost the room. She stood up, her face turning red, and slammed her hand down on the table. "This is ridiculous!" Her voice echoed in the small room, but the damage had been done. She could see that she had no support left. I wasn't going to stop now. I turned to my lawyer and nodded. It was time to present our final piece of evidence. The clause in the HOA bylaws about removing board members. We had the power, and we were going to use it. Mary was removed from her position, just like that. The board voted her out, and suddenly, the power had shifted. The once untouchable HOA was now at my mercy. You'd think after everything that had happened, I would have felt relief. But no. Instead, I felt something different, something deeper. The weight of everything I had fought for. It was starting to hit me. I wasn't just going to walk away, not after everything they'd put me through. This wasn't over yet. I remember the day after Mary's removal. It was quiet, too quiet. For the first time, I didn't hear the constant sound of paperwork being delivered to my door or the annoying letters from the HOA threatening to sue or evict. It was almost like they had given up. But I wasn't going to let them go that easily. The battle I was fighting wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about sending a message to every other HOA out there, telling them that no one was untouchable. No one could get away with terrorizing good people just trying to live their lives. That's when I made my decision. I had to strike back. and I had to do it in a way that would make them remember. I wasn't just going to let them slink away into the background. No, I was going to make them pay for everything they'd done, for all the neighbors they had bullied, for every tear they had caused. I was going to wipe them out. I'd done my homework, and that's when I found the loophole. The one piece of their system I could destroy from within. The HOA bylaws weren't just a guideline. They were the very thing holding their power in place, and it only took a small shift. A shift that could undo everything they had built. I started contacting every neighbor I could. I rallied the ones who were just as fed up as I was. We all agreed. We weren't just going to sit back and let them operate as if they were untouchable. We were going to dismantle them, piece by piece. And we were going to start with their district. Because the truth was, the HOA didn't just control my neighborhood. They controlled an entire district. And now, we had the power to take it all away. We started with legal action. The moment the new board was in place, we gathered all the evidence of their misconduct, the fines, the bullying, the lack of accountability, and we filed it all. We took them to court. We challenged their authority. We exposed them for the frauds they really were. It wasn't easy. It took months of paperwork, countless meetings, and a lot of sleepless nights. But I wasn't backing down. This was bigger than me. This was about taking control away from an organization that thrived on fear, and putting it back in the hands of the people. Our community had been through too much, and now it was our turn to make sure this never happened again. The court hearings were brutal. Mary was still trying to fight back, using every excuse she could find to protect the system that had given her power. But now, she didn't have the upper hand. She didn't have the backing of her fellow board members. She didn't have the protection of the district anymore. She was just one person, and I had an army on my side. Each argument we presented tore apart the HOA's facade. We proved that they weren't about keeping the neighborhood clean. They were about control. They were about making sure that no one ever stepped out of line. We exposed how they were misusing their powers, how they were targeting vulnerable homeowners, and how they had been using fines and threats to extort people into submission. The final blow came when we discovered that the HOA had been operating without proper permits in several areas. This was the smoking gun we had been waiting for. We took that evidence to court, and the district fell apart, piece by piece. The ruling came down on a Wednesday morning, and when I heard the judge's final words, I could hardly believe it. The HOA district was dissolved, the board was completely disbanded, and Mary was banned from ever holding a position in another HOA again. The very organization that had terrorized our neighborhood had just crumbled to dust. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for every homeowner who had been silenced, for every person who had been bullied into submission. I didn't just get my mansion back. I got my community's freedom back. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had won. The dust had finally settled, or so I thought. The HOA district was gone, the board members were gone, and the nightmare of endless fines, threats, and petty rules was over. At least that's what I thought. But as the days went by, I began to notice something strange. It wasn't the silence of victory that kept me awake at night. It was the feeling that something wasn't quite right. I had taken down the system. I had exposed them for who they truly were. But now that it was gone, I felt an odd emptiness. I thought the fight would bring me peace, but instead, it left me with more questions than answers. One afternoon I was walking around the neighborhood. It felt different now. The once perfect lawns weren't as pristine, the streets weren't as neatly manicured, but it wasn't in a bad way. It felt freer. It felt more alive. It was like the weight had been lifted off everyone's shoulders. But there was still something gnawing at me. I walked past the house at the end of the cul-de-sac. It had always been the quiet one, the house with the high walls, the one no one ever saw much of. But today, something caught my eye. A figure in the window. It wasn't unusual to see someone in their window, but this was different. The person in the window wasn't just watching. They were smiling. And it wasn't a friendly smile. Curiosity got the better of me, so I walked up the driveway. My heart was pounding in my chest as I neared the door. This house had always been a mystery, the kind of house that made you wonder who lived there and why they never seemed to interact with anyone else. But today, I needed to know. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, a little harder this time. Still nothing. Then, just as I was about to leave, the door slowly creaked open. There was no one standing in the doorway at first, but the door opened just wide enough for me to see inside. The house was eerily quiet. The walls dark and cold. But then I heard it. A voice from deep inside. Soft. Almost too quiet to hear. "Come in." I hesitated. Something about that voice sent a chill down my spine. But then, I stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me with a force that made my heart stop. I spun around, but there was no one there. The air grew heavy. The walls seemed to close in on me. I called out, but my voice echoed eerily back at me. It felt like the house was alive, breathing, waiting for something. I could feel my pulse quicken as I stepped further inside. But the closer I got to the back of the house, the darker it became. Then, I saw something. A room at the very back of the house. Its door cracked open. A dim light coming from within. I couldn't stop myself. I walked toward it, and when I reached the door, I slowly pushed it open. Inside was something I could never have imagined. An entire wall covered with pictures of me, every moment of my life, every step I'd taken since moving in. There were even photos of the day I confronted the HOA. The photos stretched across the wall like some twisted shrine. My breath caught in my throat as I turned around, but there was no one there. No footsteps, no sound of breathing, just the weight of the realization. I wasn't alone. The door behind me slammed shut, and the lights went out. I was plunged into complete darkness. For a moment, I thought it was over. I thought the house was going to swallow me whole. But then I heard it. The voice. It was much closer now, almost like it was whispering directly in my ear. "You thought you won, didn't you?" I froze. Who was this person? Who was watching me? I couldn't see their face, but their voice was haunting, and it sounded familiar, so familiar that it sent a chill through my bones. And that's when I understood. It wasn't just the HOA I'd taken down. There was someone else pulling the strings. Someone who had been watching from the shadows all along. Someone who had been waiting for the moment when I would let my guard down. Was it Mary? Had she been lurking in the background all this time? Or was there someone else in the neighborhood I had never suspected? I didn't know, but I had a feeling that this was far from over. The game had only just begun.